Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of the KurosawaCast. I'm your host, Robert Beams, and I'm joined as ever by my good friend, Craig Ennis. Hello, Craig.
Hello, Rob. Hello, everyone.
Hello. If this is your first time, the basic premise for this is that I'm a former film critic, a big Kurosawa fan, and I've seen all of Kurosawa's films at least once, most of them 3 or 4 times. And Craig is a film teacher and a filmmaker. And he's new to the films of Kurosawa, so kind of we're going through them chronologically. And this week we've gotten up to 1950, and we're on his film Scandal, which is his 9th film, I think, or is it his 10th?
I think it might be his 10th.
Yeah. So basically, I think a good way to start off. We've been quite bad on these podcasts so far of like just setting out at the beginning maybe what the film is. And maybe we should give it that. Yeah, maybe we should give it some context of what the film actually is, and then start talking about it. So, I mean, it's basically it's a kind of a social problem film about the yellow press, where Toshiro Mifune plays an artist. Strangely, he's like a celebrity landscape painter. It's like a weird thing.
He's one of those celebrity landscape painters that are all over the papers. You know, can't get away from them.
There's a scene actually where they're sort of hoping that he's a celebrity so that the titular Scandal has more juice in the press, and they're like, "Yeah, jackpot! This guy's a landscape painter." But anyway, so he's a landscape painter, and this.
Although he's known for his landscapes, but he really wants to be able to be known for his nudes. So he's like been pigeonholed in the landscape.
Pigeonholed in landscapes. Japan's not ready for nudes, he thinks. So basically, he's painting in the mountains at the start, and a young starlet singer comes upon him, I think, asking for directions, right, or something like that, asking to get to this Shinkansen, I think, which she's. I think the Shinkansen's actually the train in Japan. It's an onsen, I think, which is like one of those like hot spring hotels.
She wants directions to the bus stop. She's very famous. She's a starlet.
Yeah.
She catches the bus.
Well, she's wandering around in the mountains looking for where to get the bus. But anyway, she wants to go. She's trying to get to an onsen. No, the Shinkansen is definitely the bullet train. She's so she's trying to get to this hotel, this kind of nice retreat. She doesn't know where she's going. Mifune, he's just about finished up painting anyway, and he's got a motorcycle, and he says, "Don't you worry, son, I'll take you there." So he drives her to the hotel. They have separate rooms. They're not people who know each other. I think he's staying at the hotel anyway. So basically, but the paparazzi are at the hotel waiting to get some paps of her, and she won't talk to them. She won't go and pose for photos. So they've kind of got to be in their bonnet about that. So they take a chance snap of these two people who've turned up on the same bike. Take a chance snap of them sort of chatting to each other on the balcony of the hotel, and then present that in the kind of tabloid press. As if there's this scandal going on, this relationship between these two people. The Mifune character is shown to be pretty naive about how the press works. The film is kind of long before this term existed. It's sort of about the Streisand effect to a certain extent, isn't it?
Yeah,
where he doesn't realize that the best thing to do in this scenario is probably just to shut up, let it blow over. So he goes and punches the editor. It starts this ridiculous sort of escalation of the story and of everything, and then he eventually says he's going to sue. At that point, Takashi Shimura, the great Takashi Shimura, who I love, turns up in the movie as this slightly disreputable kind of downcast kind of lawyer from a kind of a bad neighborhood and everything, who's not particularly good at his job, and he comes to Mifune and he's like, "I'll be your lawyer. I see you want to sue the press. I'll be your lawyer. It'll be brilliant."
It kind of unfolds from there, doesn't it?
It unfolds from there. It ends in a trial scene. It ends in a courtroom drama sort of situation. But that's basically the crux of it. So going into Scandal, I know you give your sort of predictions of what you think it's going to be at the end of each episode, but to recap for those coming in now, what was your sort of view on what you thought Scandal was going to be based on sort of the synopsis and everything?
I didn't really have a clear idea of this one, but it did sound like the setup from Notting Hill. Like it sounded like a Richard Curtis film.
I think what's really interesting about that, we'll talk about this as it goes on, What's really interesting about that prediction, and the fact that I think this film is in lots of ways steals very directly from Frank Capra. And if you think about Frank Capra and you think about like a Richard Curtis film, the thing that this film really misses, to be like anything like that, is any sort of relationship between the actress, between the singer and the artist, isn't it? You kind of go into it thinking they'll develop, by the end of it, they will be in a love affair, but it just, no, nothing happens to these two characters at all.
Well, the thing is, I mean, we might as well start talking about like the start of the film, because I did think for a little while it did actually feel like a Richard Curtis plot, and then it goes off at a tangent, and you realise the film's actually something else entirely. But yeah, I mean, it kind of start like, it's really, really difficult to like Mifune's character in this. Like, he's sitting there painting these three kind of slightly annoying but amiable local yokel types come up and start to talk to him about his painting. Say, "Oh, what are you painting? Oh, the mountain's not that red. Are you famous?" And they're just kind of bothering him, and he's trying to be all kind of stoic and kind of like, he's this weird kind of doesn't really have a character, is he? He's kind of
he's a blank slate, and that's the weird thing about this film. I'll say from the off, and it's interesting because I watch the film and then I read the bit about it in Kurosawa's autobiography, and I read the bit about it in the Donald Ritchie, the Films of Akira Kurosawa book. And it was interesting because watching this film, I thought it's so strange that Takashi Shimura has like quite low billing in the credits, like fourth or fifth name that comes up.
It's his story.
Takes over the film entirely when he comes in. And I was watching it, saying to my wife Jen while we were watching, I was saying, like, he's clearly the main character in this film. He's the one who's got an arc. He's the one who needs to change. He's the one who's the focus of at least a third of the movie. But he doesn't have the billing. And then reading those books afterwards, reading about that being very directly mentioned, which I'll come to later. But it's really strange, isn't it, how that happens?
Yeah, well, because you're introduced to Mifune and he's painting, and he's quiet, and he wants peace and quiet, and he wants everyone around him to be quiet. He's this kind of archetypal kind of, he comes across as kind of like a man's man on a motorbike, no nonsense, like, this is good, this is bad, this is the way things should be. I'll give you a ride on my motorbike, you know, I'll take your bags. He's quite chivalrous, but he's very, very, very bland.
He turns up. The one thing I would say for his character in this film, I said to my wife watching it, he's the only Toshiro Mifune character, maybe the only character in all of Kurosawa who I confidently think you could cosplay as, because he has he like spends the whole movie in these, I guess it's like a 50s Japanese motorcyclist outfit, but he's got like this massive coat on and these like huge gloves and these goggles on his hat that he wears for like most of the movie, even if he's not riding his bike.
Yeah, it's like... it's a bit like that iconic image of Brando on is it The Wild One? He doesn't look like that, but you've got the idea of who this fella is, and that he's not going to take any. So he's kind of like this, not exactly rebel, but kind of this. I would imagine him just being described as the bad boy of landscape painting.
Yeah, it's the reason I did you
that's it. That is it, isn't it? It's like, I need to do this. I need to give the young woman a ride because that's the right thing to do. I need to sue the press because that's the right thing to do. There's this great bit. So there's this great bit where he goes in. He can't find a cop. So after the pictures and the story's been printed in, it's called Armour, isn't it? This magazine,
like sleazy rag. Yeah.
Sold out everywhere, and he can't get hold of a copy. So he goes in, sort of marches into this office where all these paparazzis have been kind of like giving it the big one and all that, kind of laughing. And he comes in and goes, "Where's the copy?" And he kind of sort of wanders around the office like he owns the place, reading it, going, and sort of looking through it. Then he puts it down and just decks the editor without saying anything.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that because it's very directly taken from a Capra movie. Something I wanted to mention about it, again, in this line, we're talking about what I was saying about where it really differs from Capra, which I think is the main inspiration, and also what you said about thinking it'd be something like Notting Hill, and the lack of any relationship between the two characters. Because the singer, I think the actress, I think she's called Yamaguchi. She is in the film so little. She's in it at the beginning. She's absent from it for almost most of the running length. Then she
About
pops
half,
up back
yeah.
in and pops back in and says, actually, I will join your lawsuit. Then she basically has no character for the whole rest of them. She's just sitting there. Even when Mifune makes his heartfelt thing to the court at the end, then the judge is like, oh, and do you have anything to say? And she just like nods, and he's like, all right, then no. And then that's it. And what's really odd about that is you'd sort of expect that because she's reluctant to get involved in the lawsuit, because she's more famous than he is and she's got more at stake, especially being the woman in the situation where most of the negative attention from the scandal, even in modern Japanese society, certainly in the 50s, would almost certainly be on the singer and not
the focus of the scandal is clearly going to be on her. It's
clearly going to be on her,
wronged,
right?
Yeah.
She's the most wronged from the whole thing. She's got the most to lose from the whole thing. You know, Mifune's character is not only is he an artist, but he like works in a studio of broken windows and all that kind of thing. He's not shown to be particularly anyone. So the focus of the scandal is going to be her. And you would think that her reluctance to get involved with the lawsuit, his continual escalating of the scandal would lead to a sort of tension plot between the two of them, that she's going to come into the lawsuit, he's going to end up ruining her, and there's going to be some sort of, you know, later in the film, she's going to, actually, I'm leaving the lawsuit, you're a terrible man, or whatever. There's no confrontation between them at any point.
No. There is no story beyond the setup between the two of them, really.
And then it's all on the Shimura character after that, isn't it?
And before we get into that, because that's the most interesting part of the film, I think. I just want to say, it might sound like being a little bit down on it. It's really nicely kind of all stuck together up till this point. There's some lovely little bits of business with it's all really well staged, well acted. It's really kind of whip smart, and it just kind of plods along. It's got this kind of, you know, the sort of the speed of the narrative is really, really nice. There's a lovely little section. There's lovely little kind of the plotting from point A to point B works really, really nicely. And there's this lovely little montage sequence which ends with one of the journalists sort of standing behind a camera, and you can. It's really lovely, and all the details and the kind of the points that are making are put across really, really nicely. Like the paparazzi are just complete scumbags. Like they're seen sitting around the office, sort of smoking, laughing, joking, saying we're going to make loads of money out of this, and then one of the sort of women office workers says, maybe you can pay me, and he says, yeah, shut up or something. I can't remember what he says.
It's a pretty toxic work environment, isn't it?
Yeah. And they talk about not giving a damn. They've sort of captured it. They talk about like, oh, the towers have been put up there, because there's this whole thing about they're on her balcony, he's popped into her room and he's pointing out the mountain that he was painting or something, and he leans over her, and that's when they capture the moment. And they're like, oh, look, there's 2 towers on the balcony. It's almost like they're props. They've been set up for us. And they go, you know, they say, oh, it's not exactly true, but, you know, people will believe what we print. When we print it, it becomes true. There's this little fake news thing going on. And there is this constant, like, these people are scum. Like, it's like you can hear Kurosawa sort of talking about it in the background. Yeah. And I almost had a theory watching this that something had come up about Kurosawa's private life, and this was like his paparazzi scum, because I also noticed that he wasn't part of this wasn't done by Shin Toho, which you were saying before was about they'd broken off to be auteur focused, whereas Toho had been
no, kind of the other way around. Shin Toho was the one that all the actors went off. But you're right. This is in a run of the films he made away from Toho. He made, I think it was Quiet Duel with Dalé. Then he made for Shin Toho Stray Dog, and now this is with Shochiko. So basically, there's a weird period where he leaves Toho, becomes a bit of a journeyman, and then we'll see with Rashomon. I think he goes back to Toho. Might be with Rashomon, but yeah, exactly. It's interesting. Put a pin in that, because when I get to talking about his autobiography and the other bit, so we'll return to that. But you're not wrong. I do want to talk about something about.
Also, just another thing. They frame this thing when they're having their little clandestine. He frames this thing when they're in a little clandestine chat through sort of chicken wire, almost like a prison kind of thing, which is really
I wanted
nice
to bring that up actually as well, because when you mentioned the staging of the film, there are so many sequences in it where it's just guys talking in a newspaper office, and it looks amazing, because he's either got the chicken wire stuff in the foreground with them behind it pacing around, or there's the shot where one of them walks into an office and puts his feet up on a desk, I think, and then behind him in the background there's loads of guys up against this wire sort of looking in, and he always finds an interesting way to kind of populate the frame and stage things nicely. seriously, even when it's a couple of people having a chat or something fairly low stakes. I also want to mention that there's a lot made about Kurosawa being this humanist. Kurosawa generally not, painting in shades of grey and not just saying kind of people are evil or anything. The newspaper guy in this film, he is the clearest thing to just an absolute diabolical villain in any Kurosawa film. And the actor that plays him, I think's in a lot of other Kurosawa films. I can't quite place him right now, but he's in a lot of stuff. He gives great twat face, doesn't he, during the whole trial sequence at the end? Like he's so brilliantly hateable. That guy. But no, I wanted to talk about the
I've got because it's not subtle. I've got it's really nice, but I've got a line here and I can't remember. Maybe you'll remember what this is. I've got a line that I've written down, says let society laugh it off. Is that to do with the kind of don't worry, we'll forget about that, we'll come back to that. I'll remember what it is. Yeah, go on. The montage.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say with the montage, I love how much he packs into that montage, because you've got this interplay between, it's when he punches the guy and then suddenly you get him talking to the press, then the press responding, him talking to the press responding. It starts off print journalism, doesn't it? And it's people there taking notes.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, it's clearly television. So it shows the kind of escalation of the scandal. It also, and this isn't subtle, but it's just something that's really beautifully done, it shows his naivety versus how media savvy they are, because they're always looking at the audience, speaking into the microphone. They know what the kind of media they're engaging with works like, and they know how to speak to it, and they know what they need to say. Whereas every time it cuts to Mifune, he's turning away from microphones and he's putting his hand on them and all that kind of thing. And it's a really beautiful sequence that comes the closest of anything in the film to making the Mifune character like have a character, because he's clearly shown as being this naive guy that doesn't really understand what he's getting into, and then the film sort of just loses interest in him.
It reminds me of the tables. It reminded me a little bit of the table scene in Citizen Kane. The
escalation of that through the montage. Yeah,
really good.
Absolutely. I also wanted to mention, this is kind of an incidental thing, but it's early on in my notes, and I wanted to bring it up. The transfer I watched of this, I don't know about you, was very crackly. The sound wasn't very good. And it's on Criterion Channel, so I assume it's the best master sort of available. And I was just wondering, like, whether films like Seven Samurai, Rashomon, Hidden Fortress would all also look and sound like this if they weren't as popular as they are, because this is one of the more kind of niche Kurosawa films, one of the least celebrated ones, and it did definitely stick out to me that it looked, the transfer of it was markedly less good than Stray Dog or than the ones that come after. I don't know if that popped out to you. Some of the sound kind of popped at times. The image was kind of crackly in a way that you see for a lot of films from that period that haven't been maybe kept in as good nick, and it just seemed kind of a shame. But
possibly,
things like Seven Samurai that's been so remastered and stuff over the years that you don't get any of that.
Possibly. I mean, I ended up watching this on YouTube because I didn't have access to the television, so I had to watch it through YouTube. So I'm quite used to watching things that are a little bit crackly. I must say that didn't. I was immersed in the film. Like, I wasn't worried about the sound or the image quality. Like, it's a little bit hokey, this film, but it's well told, even if it's hokey. Like like I say, the narration, the pacing, speed of the dialogue, the kind of the forward momentum of the story is engaging. And I think some of the left turns that it takes, which we'll talk about in a minute, actually kind of, because I put a note down here saying this film is fun, because it is fun. And then I put a little note down later saying, I think I know exactly where this is going, right at the point where it switched gears. And
yeah.
So I enjoyed that.
I want to point as well, like, how good a writer Kurosawa is, like, not just in terms of the structure and things like that, but in terms of dialogue, because the sequence in the dark room, which is again really nicely shot. I love the way that's framed. I love the light in that scene and everything. They're in the dark room, gathered round, and the bit where they're looking at the image, and one of them makes this comment because they need the Mifune character to be a celebrity for it to have juice. And one of them makes this comment saying, are we going to be drinking moonshine or champagne? Right. That's near the beginning of the scene. And at the end of the scene, the guy goes, I know who this guy is. And somebody shouts, what is it? What is it? And the guy says, it's champagne. Is it moonshine or champagne? It's champagne. And I love, like, things like that are you know, you've seen things like that in other films. There's a setup, and then there's, you know, obviously a payoff to it. But stuff like that is not that easy to write. I'm saying as somebody who's in the middle of like actually trying to write a book at the moment, and I'm starting to notice a lot of things like that craft wise a lot of times when they come up, and it just makes me admire, like, considering he's a director primarily and he's not somebody celebrated as a writer, considering how quickly in his autobiography he always talks about bashing out these screenplays, he's got a real craft to how he can kind of structure a scene and write.
That's why I wonder if this was written as some sort of vendetta and he was having fun doing it. It's much easier to do those sort of things when you're having fun. You know, that's the sort of thing that organically, that's the sort of in-joke that organically kind of just manifests when you're talking amongst friends and peers and in groups, isn't it? So if he's sitting there enjoying himself writing this, then that sort of thing might pop up. Talking about Shimura, because I think I really like the scene where he's introduced. There's a bit of a bait and switch around his character, not entirely, but at the end of this scene, I put this is a film by a man who hates everyone. The humanity comes back in afterwards, but at this point, like, everybody's kind of, you've got the two non-characters, and then you've got a bunch of hateful people. But what's interesting about this whole scene with the introduction of Shimura's character is just how none of it, I don't think, would get through the Hays Code. So it starts off, and he's kind of he's painting with this model, and she's talking about how he doesn't paint her nude anymore, and she's worried it's because she's
flabby because she's had a baby.
Yeah, and he's like, no, it's not that. I just don't think Japan's kind of ready for nudes. And she's like, oh, you're just making excuses so I don't feel bad. But they're talking very candidly about being naked and nude, and I don't think that would make it into an American film at the time. And then Shimura's character comes in, and he talks about, like, he kind of comes in, he's disheveled, it's a rainy night, and he goes, oh, there's no lights around here, I've just stepped into some open sewage. And he's talking about and he sort of takes his boots off, and he kind of he accidentally waves his socks in the model's face. And then he talks about Supreme Court thing about urinating in the street, and it's just like, oh, it's this again, it's the kind of this bum. It's really quite nice, but this lawyer comes through who's just completely I don't know, he just bumbles in.
He's kind of low and disgusting, isn't he, in a way which is really, I think Shimura is a better actor than Mifune. Like, Mifune is a better movie star. Like, there's a scene later in the film when everyone's singing Old Lang Syne, which we'll get to. I really like that.
That's
scene.
really nice. Yeah.
There's a scene later where everyone's singing Old Lang Syne. It cuts to all these very characterful people, and then there's a big shot with Mifune in it and everyone in the bar. And I said to my wife, like, spot the movie star. Right, because Mifune's like 2 foot taller than everybody else, the most handsome man in the frame, obviously, and Mifune is a very magnetic, very charismatic movie star. But Mifune, I've noticed watching the films in this chronological order and starting from the beginning, more than ever did in the past. Mifune really struggles when Kurosawa gives him one of these fairly limp, straight man central protagonist characters, like in The Quiet Duel, for example. And again here, it's much less compelling when he's someone who's really given this kind of, in wrestling terminology, like white meat babyface role to play. You know, he's kind of in there, he kind of struggles. Whereas Shimura, he's like, he can do it all. Like, Shimura can be the kind of schlemiel, sad sack, low guy. He can be in Akira, this bureaucrat. You'll see later, he's amazing in that. You see him as the leader of the Seven Samurai. He plays nobles and he plays commoners, and he does the whole gamut in Drunken Angel, that kind of the drunk doctor. You know, he's got this real range, which I guess is why he sticks around through Kurosawa's films as this character actor more than anything. But when he comes into the film, like, he's got all of the he's got all the drama, all the emotional beats, everything in every bit of life is in that character.
His introduction, you can almost, if it was a comic book character, if he was in the Beano, you can see the stink lines being drawn around him.
You can. And although obviously, sorry.
And they even mention, like, after he leaves, like, his name means Leechfield or something like that. And then they're debating over whether there's a discussion about she's not keen on him, and he's like, oh, give him a chance. And then it's followed up with this really lovely bit of sort of mise en scène work where Mifune goes to see him at his office, and then the person in the office building says there's no fifth floor. It says my office on the fifth floor. So he goes up the building, and there is no fifth floor, but there is a roof, and on top of the roof there's a shack with law office written on it, and these washing lines all hang out. I mean, you haven't even seen him yet, but like his environment is introduced so well, and it just matches the character, and you've got this kind of complete character. But at the same time, you've just been introduced to a young girl with TB who's a bit of a kind of I mean, she's a bit of,
she's a plot device, and she's a
plot device. And she's kind of this kind of unearned symbol of virtue, angelic creature, and you later find out she's the daughter. But immediately, once you find that out, you've got this kind of hint of this kind of redemption and why he's doing what he's doing. Because up to this point, I suspected that what was going to happen was that it'd be back and forth. The case would get worse and worse and worse, and at the last minute, the singer would go, right, I'm in, and come in and do her testimony and that. But actually, what happens is you find out this young girl's got TB. Her father is the lawyer, down at heel lawyer, and what he sees is an opportunity to go to the editor of the magazine and say, look, I'm going to represent Toshiro Mifune, but I'm going to throw the case if you pay me. And the rest of the film then becomes his own internal moral battle between sort of trying to take the case on and taking the money in order to save his daughter.
Yes, it does, and that becomes the whole focus basically from that point on, doesn't it? And one thing I wanted to add about Shimura, just before we can move on from him as an actor, is just that obviously I don't speak Japanese, and sometimes it's hard when you are watching people speak another language to really know what they're doing with the way they're speaking and their voice and things. I could definitely hear when he was speaking this film that he is doing a very different voice to how he speaks in a lot of other films. Because, for example, you compare his character here to like later you'll see him in Seven Samurai or even other films we've watched. Like he's got a very like phlegmy, hacky cough kind of like gross voice at various points. He's definitely kind of doing a lot there as well, which I wish I could appreciate more fully. But I think he's just a really interesting character actor.
I'm sure there's all sorts of accent nuances that are somehow coded that the ears aren't attuned to that are going on, which is one of the things that you do miss out on when you're watching a film in there.
Absolutely. So I just want to mention before we move on how Capraesque this is. I've said already it's Capraesque. We talked about One Wonderful Sunday being quite obviously Capraesque, and it is known that Kurosawa was a big fan of It's a Wonderful Life and lots of the Capra films of the kind of the interwar years. So it is a reference that he definitely had. And what's interesting about this, as soon as I started watching it, I was thinking this is a classic. Like as soon as it started, because I saw this film once years and years ago. It's not a Kurosawa film I know very well. And as soon as I started watching it last night, I was struck by just how Capraesque the setup is. If you take it that there's this kind of guy who's going to do the right thing, even though it's going to make him look potentially ruin his life or be hard for him. He's going to fight against corrupt authority. He's going to fight against sort of bad social ills. And he's going to stand up for himself in that way against the fact that it's going to maybe fall down on him is a very Capraesque setup. The fact that he's this kind of populist hero as well. But then you also get it's in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town with Gary Cooper, where a recurring thing is because this guy is such a kind of a naive, kind of an affable, moral but very naive guy. Mr. Deeds goes through the film punching people out as soon as they annoy him or slight him because he's just a kind of salt of the earth fella, which is exactly what Mifune does when he meets the editor, right?
I've only seen the Adam Sandler version.
I'm sure the same thing happens in the Sandler version, though, right? Like sounds like a Sandler character. He gets angry and then he punches people, but actually he's a nice guy with a heart of gold and blah blah blah, right? Probably the same in the Sandler version.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So basically, Mr. Deeds punches people out, and then the Mifune character punches this guy in a very similar manner. Something else that struck me as being really Capra is some of the sentimentality there with the girl with the TB, which again kind of plucks at your heartstrings. Felt very much like it would be at home in one of those movies. You have a kind of drunken, well-meaning supporting characters is a very Capraesque thing. You have the bit in the trial sequence where you have one of those farmers turns up and he's asked by the judge to take an oath, and the guy says, "Oh, it's to say that you'll tell the truth," and the guy goes, "Well, I've never told a lie in my life," and everyone laughs in the courtroom. I can't pinpoint it, but I know for a fact that's in a Capra movie. That is stolen directly from a courtroom scene, either in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town or in Meet John Doe. It's in one of those films that exact thing happens, where a guy resents being asked to say that he's going to tell the truth because he would never lie. That's in those movies. The whole courtroom scene with the kind of funny, oddball character witnesses that come in that get laughed at by the courtroom, that's like straight out of a Capra movie. Like, and which
there's
makes
a David and Goliath thing as well, isn't there? They hire the famous law professor from the university to be their lawyer.
Exactly. And then finally, just to round off the weird Capra similarities, there's also the fact that the film takes place incidentally at Christmas at some point, which is very brilliant. It just is Christmas at some point. And
there's
then
this really weird bit of Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin when Mifune's carrying a
Christmas
on a motorbike, and then all the kids start running after him, singing, shouting "Merry Christmas" at him. It's kind of really apropos of nothing, but it's really delightful.
Yeah. But as well, like I think Patrick H. Williams, YouTuber, film essayist, said about this recently about It's a Wonderful Life. The fact that It's a Wonderful Life, it's kind of incidental that it's at Christmas. It's only kind of at Christmas at the end, but it's still a Christmas movie because the themes and the message of the movie is so much to do with Christmas. And I feel like in the same way, Kurosawa kind of does that here. Like, I wouldn't go as far as say this is a Christmas movie. What I would say is that when Christmas comes into the film, it's because it's a moment of them all going around the girl with the TB, all being about families together. That's the night where the Shimura character is so overcome with his guilt that he can't even go in and face his daughter. And I was kind of joking with my wife watching it that the mother's like, "Come on, think of your daughter, you've got to come in." And the Fini character's like, "It's all right, I'll handle this," and just takes him out on an all-night bender. Probably not what the mum had in mind.
There is a really lovely bit where you feel like, in terms of the humanity, they go to this bar and everyone's drinking and being a little bit sort of
maudlin and
and a bit excessive and that kind of thing. And then it becomes this Auld Lang Syne sing song, and then all these characters who possibly some of them are kind of shown as maybe being a sort of little bit sort of low lifey kind of thing. Yeah. They all sort of come together,
and prostitutes and things like that, I think, in the coding.
But there's this really lovely kind of moment of unity, and it's followed up by Mifune and Shimura kind of stumbling home drunk together. And there's this really lovely kind of, after all these months in lockdown and not being able to go to the pub, it made me a little bit nostalgic about the end of the night, wandering home with a friend, being pissed out of your head.
Yeah.
It was really, really lovely.
And I actually wrote in my notes about this, because the thing is, if you know anything about Mifune, if you know anything about Kurosawa or Ozu or any of the people that are around in Japanese cinema in this era, you'll know that they all spent pretty much all their money on drink and were pissed all the time. so the thing is watching them do this drunk thing and be really realistic drunk. I was like, well, obviously they're really realistic drunk. I mean, these guys were drunk all the time.
It's really, really nice. It is really, really it is warm. It's kind of like I say, it's not a particularly subtle film, and it is best when it's dealing with the lawyer character. And there is plenty to laugh about in some of the execution. There's some really, like, one of my favorite things in sort of film set in other countries is whenever I see the procedural Law and Order, just the way that courts are laid out differently, the way that trials are run. There's some good stuff in I think it's Parasite around this as well, where you see a South Korean court, or maybe it's not Parasite. Maybe I'm thinking of something else. There's quite a poor Richard Gere film called Red Corner, but you go through sort of the Chinese legal system there. I like seeing that going on. I don't think it's a very good. I don't know anything about Japanese legal system, but I doubt this is a very good reflection on the Japanese legal system, because it all builds up to Shimura's sort of the trial gets worse and worse and worse for Mifune's character, and builds up, so it all kind of builds up inside Shimura's character right till the last day of the trial, where the defense lawyer has been saying most of his defense has been, well, their lawyer's not doing procedure properly. It's nothing about the actual evidence or anything like that. It's like, well, you're not, he's not cross-examining
It seemed
people.
like, because that guy's supposed to be like an esteemed law professor, basically, like an expert on law, and it seemed that he was trying to flag up that the trial wasn't being run properly from the opposition lawyer's side on a fundamental, like as a point of professional pride rather than it being his defense.
Exactly.
He's clearly winning, but he's also going, but can I also point out the other lawyer is really not representing his client, and we really ought to look into that because this is weird.
and then basically he confesses at the end, and that kind of like they win the trial, when actually surely it should be a mistrial.
Probably, yeah.
Which was a little bit odd, but
yeah, that would add a whole another hour onto the film, wouldn't it? There, the mistrial and retrial of the character. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's very funny. But from a dramatic standpoint, what Kurosawa, you could argue it's overwrought. Like, you could really argue he stretches it too far. But what he does from a dramatic standpoint there is Kurosawa makes it feel like Shimura is never going to stand up and like do the right thing. Like, he has so many opportunities. After the point where his daughter tells him to do the right thing, he gets asked by the opposition lawyer why he's not giving evidence, and he says nothing. He gets asked to give a closing statement, and he says nothing. It goes all the way through to the point where it's like about to be sentencing before this guy's like, hang on a minute, I've got something to say. And he really stretches out that tension, doesn't he?
He does, but like I say, overwrought maybe, but I didn't find this film, I don't know, maybe it was just kind of looking at, maybe it was supposed to be more melodramatic than it was, but I kind of found it light and fun. I think part of that could be to do with the fact that the scandal's just a big nothing burger by today's standards. Do you know what I mean? It's not, it's two people photographed together. It may have been more scandalous in 1950 Japan. It might have had more weight to it. Maybe it wasn't supposed to.
From what I know about Japan, which, I'm not passing myself off as an expert, but from what I do know, that would still be a scandal for a female celebrity today if they were photographed in a way that implied they were having like sex outside of marriage. And, because you get a lot of, for example, there was a J-pop group who one of the members had to like publicly shave their heads and give a press conference apologizing for the fact they had a boyfriend. Right, so like there's some weird shit going on in Japan with like female celebrity. So the idea, even in now, let alone in 1950, of a female celebrity who would have been being marketed as being pure and wholesome and traditional, then being photographed being in her dressing gown on a balcony of a hotel with some random guy, would be a scandal in Japan, I would say, probably.
I mean, that's it's interesting contextually, but me as a viewer bringing my sort of cultural context to it doesn't land, but that didn't ruin the film for me. I've put it on page after page. I'm enjoying this is fun. I found it really light, and I think the fact that I thought it was quite fun and funny in places meant that if it does get melodramatic at that point, I'm fully expecting that kind of Capra feel, that kind of goodwill out, and I'm waiting for the happy ending, basically. And I guess the fact that the daughter does die sort of 10 minutes before the end does suggest that it is a little bit more melodramatic than my reading of it.
Yeah, possibly. I personally don't really feel like it's overwrought. Like I was with it, but I could definitely see it being open to that criticism. You see what I mean? Like he really does push it quite far on the limits of I think patience. It also has that way of ending that a lot of old films have, where they just end very like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington's like this. Like it's a very Capra thing as well, just to be like, yeah, it's done now. Like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, it's literally like he's doing a filibuster, and then somebody comes in and they go like, no, actually, he is right, or whatever, and then it's just like the end. You know, there's no come down from it at all. And this is very much like that. Like Mifune basically gives like a little interview after the trial, and he goes, "Yeah, glad I won." Good. And then it ends.
We haven't talked much about him because there's not much to say, but just to underscore how much of a kind of a, I mean, nothing almost. If he's anything, he's a douchebag. There's a bit where he's really angry towards the end of the trial, and he starts revving up his motorbike and upsetting everybody in the room.
Yeah, that's true.
And he goes, "I just needed to hear the sound."
Yeah. There's another thing I wanted to say about the Mifune character in it, actually, which I think is one of the film's biggest flaws from my perspective, which is there's a bit where the daughter and the mum tearfully tell him that he's being fleeced by the lawyer and that the lawyer is conning him and not trying to win the trial, right? And Mifune's response is to be like, yeah, I know. And the problem with that is it doesn't make Mifune's character seem like a really great man who's looking out for the Shimura character. It makes him seem like an absolute idiot. Like you're sitting and go, why are you just letting this guy throw away your trial, you moron?
It's like because it completely kind of contradicts his motivation, because like he wants to get retribution for this thing, but now actually he wants to
help the Shimura character, and also like.
But I guess there are little kind of interactions between him and the daughter, and he, you know, she is a plot device, but he does describe her as pure as the stars in the sky at one point, and maybe that's part of it. But he is this like I say, the bit with the motorbike where he just gets angry and revs his motorbike and upsets everyone. I've put, and he says, I just needed to hear, or whatever it is he says. I was losing confidence. I just wanted to hear that sound. And my note next to that says Ron Burgundy, because it reminded me of the bit where he comes into the office and he's going 997, 900. I don't know if you heard. It's a really big number. It's like, he's a dick. The more I think about it, he's a dick.
So in going to Kurosawa's autobiography, for some of his quotes on the making of the film. He starts off probably the most Partridge bit of this section, because if you're new to the show, there is a lot of accidental Alan Partridge in this, and it's not hitting the heights of when he wished that Japan had won the war because some American complained about animal cruelty. But it is quite good, because this just sounds like every sort of Tory, basically. It just says, after the Pacific War, a great deal of noise began to be made about freedom of speech, and almost immediately abuses and losses of self-control ensued. So it's like, that's kind of how he frames it. But basically, he talks about how he was inspired to make this film because, and we'll come back to what you said about him being a target of the press, because he does not mention that in his autobiography, but handily it is mentioned in the Ritchie books. So he paints this as being very selfless. In his autobiography, he talks about how he was on the train to work and he saw an advert in a magazine that was, the headline was who stole X's virginity, and he was really outraged that this woman in the press was being slurred this way. They're talking about who took this woman's virginity, and he was really outraged about it, right? I made a note about this saying I think it's very strange that he was so inspired by feeling outraged for this woman in the press.
He made a film about a lawyer.
He made a film about a lawyer, but also that the woman in the film doesn't get a character or do anything or have any agency or anything in the whole movie. So that's interesting. But anyway, he talks about how he's inspired by that. And he talks about how he didn't know this person personally, but he just couldn't tolerate this slander, and how he thought that they needed to be kind of some people who were willing to stand up and actually take these people to court, which is kind of the wish fulfillment fantasy, I think, at the heart of the concept, was that somebody would actually challenge them and push them. And basically, he then goes on to talk about, I've got here about the, he talks about his own film, saying that scandal proved to be as ineffectual a weapon against slander as a praying mantis against a hatchet. He says here, because he says that obviously his film didn't change anything, and that if anything, things got worse post scandal. And he talks about the fact that he quite like, this is a common theme in his autobiography. Actually, he has a little bit here where he talks about how he would like to revisit the subject and make another film about this, a better one, but obviously he never did. But he kind of talks about that. He chastises himself for the film being kind of too mild on the press, and then the bulk of the rest of the chapter about this is that he talks about how the Hiruta character. This is what I thought was really interesting, because I saw the film, as you did, and I thought it's really weird this lawyer character's taken over the movie. And he talks about here how he accidentally basically just shifted the film onto the lawyer. Yeah, on top of that, while I was writing the script, an entirely unexpected character began to take on more life than the main characters, and I ended up being led around the nose by him, he says. And he talks about how this character had this kind of compelling internal life where they wrote the script, not him. And from that point on, the character just kind of took over and dictated to him what needed to happen based on the character. And he talks about how once the film was done, it was like a year or so later when he suddenly remembered that he'd based this entire character on a man he met while drunk in a bar. and all of that stuff, like apparently he was like drinking in this bar and this man was ranting and raving about how he's really specific, he was ranting and raving about how his daughter had tuberculosis and she was an angel and he was a dog, and he was never going to be good enough for his daughter's estimations and all this. And then the people in the bar gave this guy some stuff to take home to his daughter, and he like ran out crying to go and give it to his daughter in the night drunk, and all this kind of thing. Kurosawa talks about how the film is basically just about this man he met drunk in a bar one night, and it ended up kind of being taken over by that character, which is very strange, but also very similar to one of the earlier films I talked about, where I said that he talked about years later remembering it was based on a person he met. So yeah, there's that. And then also on the Ritchie book side, this will speak to what you specifically
my hypothesis as I was watching it.
Yeah, exactly. Your hypothesis, you're watching it. So basically he talks here about how perhaps the reason that he was so bothered about it was that a magazine after the war, more than one magazine, linked him romantically to Hideko Takamine, who had been the actress in the film Horses, which you'll remember he was the assistant director of before he made his first movie, right? And he's kind of credited now sort of as a co-director of it, that he made as an assistant director with his mentor. So he was linked in the press romantically. It's so weird that the Japanese kind of dirt sheet media, kind of yellow press, were talking about assistant directors getting people, but whatever, they were the assistant directors were obviously big celebrities. And he talks about how he was linked with this actress. These stories spoke of a doomed romance and insinuated that Kurosawa was more loving than loved. Leaving aside whether or not these tales were based on anything more than the opportunistic imagination which the director so castigates in this film, they prove very long-lived. Even now one hears them repeated and heads are wisely nodded, Donald Ritchie says. So you're absolutely right. It sounds like, even though he doesn't mention it in his autobiography, Ritchie points out that Kurosawa was at one point the target of the press and really resented it. And he talks as well about how Kurosawa famously never appeared on Japanese TV, very rarely gave interviews. So he also kind of had an ambivalent attitude towards the press in general, which again, he doesn't talk about in his autobiography. So kind of he omits those details for some reason, maybe wanting to seem more driven by some sort of selfless, noble wish to protect others. But there it is. So that all said, what is your overall impression of Scandal?
This felt like I don't know. It was very watchable. It felt, it was enjoyable. It wasn't the most technically assured of the films that I've seen. It wasn't particularly mind-blowing in the filmmaking. It was just solid. It felt like a really commercial, enjoyable film. I enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
I've put up your the high and low chart where you've been rating them on an axis of enjoyment and appreciation. Where would you put Scandal?
It would probably be just a nudge. Actually, it's probably it's probably along with the most beautiful in terms of appreciation, and just above it, I would say. That looks about right. Below One Wonderful Sunday. It's not as good as One Fun. It's not as technically good
But
as
there,
One Wonderful. Yeah, that looks about right to me.
nice. Okay, there it is then. So, any other final closing thoughts? Any closing statement? Any last minute passion speech to the judge?
I don't think so. I think most of that stuff we covered most of it. It's I could see a remake of this. I could see it being updated to include all sorts of references to fake news and social media and all that kind of stuff. Like it is one of those. It does come across as one of those timeless kind of moral scandal, moral outrage kind of debates that just doesn't go away, and that every generation feels like they've discovered as well. You know,
Yeah,
I would imagine. You know, I can imagine sort of. I can imagine people in towns in centuries going by their parents would be, you know, parents of people saying, "Oh, the kids are just obsessed with stories about the royals. That's all they want to hear about. Royals, royals, royals." You know, he's just a duke. Why are you interested in his life? Like, you know. So I could see it. It's got some sort of timeless kind of themes and ideas, and it was fun.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I more or less agree. I think we gave very similar scores on Letterboxd as well. I kind of end up thinking it's kind of mid-pack, to be honest, this one. There was one more thing is I realized I said during watching it to my wife, I said I should have had a segment on this show all along where I ask for your rating of for my wife's rating on how hot Toshiro Mifune was in the films. I
did put a note saying these are very handsome people.
He is,
like when he meets the singer character at the start, it's like, oh, this is a handsome couple.
Yeah. So I was going to have her do sort of a rating system, and then I asked her out of 10 how sexy Toshiro Mifune was in Scandal while he was wearing his his actual goggles and his big coat and his big gloves, and she gave him a 10, and I realized that there was no point doing the rating system if he was always going to make a 10. So I think we just have to leave it as a standard that he is always at a 10. So with that final statement on Scandal, next week we will be doing Rashomon, which is definitely
the biggest one we've done so far, isn't it?
The biggest one we've done so far, and definitely one of them that would be sort of mentioned in his top 5 films or his top 3 films. Yeah. You know, I know it's in a lot of people's best films of all time lists. Like I was, for example, maybe I shouldn't talk about this person, but in Woody Allen's top 10 films of all time list, Rashomon's in there. You know, he's very well loved. I think Rashomon turns up in the Sight and Sound poll quite high up as well. So
it's usually at this point you ask me what I think it's going to be about, and it's a film that I possibly hadn't heard of up until now. You know, even though I hadn't seen a Kurosawa film until we started doing this, of course I know what Rashomon is. Like, you know, I think other than Seven Samurai, you know, other than Seven Samurai, it's probably the one that most people will have heard of, and there's probably people who've heard of it who don't even know that it's a film as well, because the Rashomon effect is quite it's a known sort of phrase, isn't it? In that kind of people seeing different perspectives on the same event. It's a phrase that's used out of the context of film as well, in terms of witness statements and investigation and all sorts of things. Like it's so well known. I'd also say that there's been little hints towards it, I think, in the last 2 films, like Stray Dog, when they were talking about the 2 paths diverging and the different forks a film could take. There's also that bit where they talk about capturing the moment in the film we've just talked about in Scandal, where they talk about the photograph and saying we can make the story up from here. People will see the truth as they want to see it. Like, the idea of it is kind of really well covered ground now, and there's kind of,
in fact, you get during the court case scene, you get the witnesses who are technically telling the truth, but they've got their own spin and perception of events, which the defense can make look like the guys were in a relationship. So, yeah, absolutely, you're right.
The word Rashomon is kind of also used as sort of filmmaking shorthand in writing sometimes. We'll Rashomon an ending when the audience think they've seen a scene at the start or in the middle of the film, and then some other extra information is given to them to put that scene in a new context as well.
Okay. So even though you know all of this, what you've just said about Rashomon, what are your expectations? Because when I first watched it, I can remember. I don't want to give anything away, but I can remember feeling it was going to be presented in one particular way, and then it ending up formally and everything being very different to what I expected. Like, what are your expectations for?
Oh, in terms of how it's actually presented?
Yeah, how it's presented and all that.
Well, I don't really know, but I was always assuming that it was like, because it's quite short. It says 4 different perspectives. To me it sounded like almost like a portmanteau, where you would get like 4 20-minute shorts strung together, and then some sort of conclusion at the end. That's the way I kind of see it. I expect it to be.
Yeah, you're not wrong. But we'll talk about sort of where my original expectations were next time. But yeah, excellent. So we'll talk about Rashomon next time. Stay tuned for that one. It will be coming up here probably sometime next weekend if we get around to that. And yeah, thank you very much for watching and for listening.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.